All right, Eric, thanks for coming, man. Well, thanks for being virtually available. Go ahead and introduce yourself, dude. Where are you working at? What are you doing there? All that good stuff.
Yeah. So, hey guys, thanks for having me. My name is Eric. I currently work in people operations at a media publisher called Attention. For those of you who don't know, people operations is a modern term for HR.
Sweet, thanks, dude. Yeah, I've noticed because I have you on LinkedIn, so I remember your job title being that. I think I've seen people at other. Trying to remember what that one moving company is.
Clutter, maybe.
Yes, yeah, yeah. They have a similar names like that too, right? I think for
Yeah.
the job. So I'm curious. I'm gonna see where I'm not. I don't know if you'll have an answer. I'm curious why that ended up happening. Where they had like the regular name. I don't know. Maybe it makes it more fun. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, so it's funny actually that we talk about this now. So I hosted we do like a spring summit at work, and I hosted a course on people ops last week.
Uh huh.
And I think the reason why there's been a shift in titles and just kind of renaming the field, if you will, is kind of becoming more strategic as HR partners. So I think
Mm,
nowadays we've kind of shifted into a lot more of a people centric approach
mm.
versus HR kind of traditionally being viewed as a lot more of like an administrative task or just like paper pushers or um,
Ah.
like fun suckers, hall monitors, whatever you want to call it. Now it's a lot more strategic and it's a lot more about advocating for the people and creating a positive company culture for the people.
That actually makes then I'm glad I asked that because that does make more sense because I used to be part of the group that was like, well, what exactly does HR do? Like I never understood it. I'm like, do they just look at my resume? And we'll talk about that too. But before that was always my thing. I'm like, I don't get it. What exactly do these group of people over there do? So we'll
Yeah.
talk about that. So let's get some background on you, Eric. So college wise or like out of high school, where'd you go? Was where you went, what you were planning on doing? Is what you majored with the first thing you were thinking about majoring in? What went
Yeah,
on there?
for sure. I went to Glendale High School, and if we're going way back, I mean, I didn't have the greatest grades in high school, so wasn't taking life too seriously back then. But I ended up taking a California high school exit exam, so I left high school early. I
Mm-hmm.
got my diploma at 16, and then I started community college. They didn't have super good grades, and I couldn't go straight to a 4 year.
Mm-hmm.
So I just completely changed that. 3.7 transferred over to LMU, Loyola Marymount University. So I got my undergrad in communication and media studies.
Mm-hmm.
And no, I mean, to answer your question, I wouldn't say that I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to major in communication just because it was very broad and I felt like it would allow me to do a lot of different things or just kind of get involved in different fields. I feel like any HR professional will tell you that HR wasn't like their top choice in
Mm-hmm.
school or when you're growing up. It's not the sexiest field by any means, but I kind of fell into it. Honestly, I went to a mixer and I got to meet a bunch of HR professionals there, and they were actually trying to almost recruit college students that weren't necessarily interested in HR and try to get them involved.
Oh, interesting.
So I ended up doing an HR focused internship at the company called Aflac.
Mm-hmm.
The benefits company, and I ended up doing that, and then I landed a couple of gigs prior to the role that I'm in now.
So when you did Aflac, you're as you're doing it, like, oh, actually, this seems like a field I'm interested in.
Yeah, I mean, it was cool because it was very people focused, and I think that's kind of the fun aspect of our job is dealing with
Mm-hmm.
so many different people, so many different personalities, so many different issues even that you come across. So the internship was most heavily focused on recruiting and like onboarding processes, right? Like how do you ensure a positive
Mm-hmm.
onboarding process? How do you make sure paperwork is done correctly? And then recruiting, right, bringing talent in. So those were the two main focuses of that internship, and I had a good time doing that. And then before you knew it, I was just like, okay, well, why don't I try making a career out of this and focusing on people and scaling and growing a company. And then that's kind of how my career started in this field.
Okay. That's cool. Okay, so I want to go back to when you were saying you were in high school, you did the exit exam. You did
Yeah.
the exit exam, grades weren't great, so you couldn't hop to the 4 year. But then you said when you so you the 3.7 was that out that was Loyola? That was your GPA there?
So that was my. It's funny. So I had a 3.7 GPA, my cumulative GPA at Glendale College. So doing my
Okay.
GEs, had
Mhm.
a 3.7. I transferred out to Loyola Marymount, and then it's funny that I actually I ended up finishing with like a 3.7 at LMU also.
So what do you think it was for you that you because I was honestly same way. For I don't know, this part maybe it wasn't for you. So for me, from like elementary to middle school, I was very studious. Like my always had the E's in elementary school. Came to middle school, it was always A's and stuff. And then I don't know what happened. Freshman year of high school just completely went out the window for me. Like I was on probation. I was like sub 2.0 GPA,
Oh
and
no.
then 10th, 11th, 12th started to kind of regroup and then ended up doing what I did. But I'm curious for you. So whenever you left high school, what was the did something happen? Did you talk with someone, or was it just for you? It was like, let's just kind of start cleaning things up and do a little bit better.
Yeah, I think it was kind of just a combination or like a mixture of things.
Mm,
I think in high school I was just kind of being a kid and
mm,
felt that I was entitled to feel however I felt and that none of
yeah.
this mattered and I could just make my own decisions and do whatever I want, which obviously is true to a certain degree. But I think my parents never went to school. They never went to college. I was the first member of my immediate family to go to college. But I had an older sister who actually had to put college on the back burner for a little bit. 'Cause my mom had gotten sick for a while, and she had to just kind of focus on being home and being with the family. And so she was always like, "Dude, like you got to go to college. Like you should
Mhm.
get your shit together." Excuse me, I don't know if
Yeah,
I'm
no, you're good. You're good.
but yeah, and so I was like, you're right, and I was messing around in school, and it obviously wasn't going to benefit me in any way. And I had an idea of what I wanted my life to be like in the future, and just kind of have a career, respectable career, have fun,
Yeah.
some money, obviously, like any young guy, young kid. So I just kind of decided to break out of my habits in high school of not caring about school and not caring about my future and what that means. And then I just kind of hit the books. And it was good to get out of high school early because I got to jump into classes at community college and have no distractions. I didn't have my friends. I had a whole semester to
Mm,
myself to get ahead of everybody else, all my classmates in my grade, and that helped me. So I did exactly 2 years. I was able to get my grades together, apply to a bunch of colleges. I got into I think 4 out of 6 of the colleges I applied to, and I
nice.
ultimately chose LMU.
So, would you recommend your strategy in that do the high school? Because that the high school exit exam, I don't think is too common. I only know one of my other friends that did the same thing. But you know, again, so I know you and him that did that. But both of you ended up being successful, especially early stages of career. Like what he's doing now, he's in a very good position. He went to a solid school, studied there, did very well there. But he did the same thing. He left at 16 as well. He might maybe it won't work for every single person, but the lone two people that I know that did it are so far looking pretty good out the gates. So if you would recommend it, what kind of person do you think it benefits?
Yeah, I mean, I think I personally think it was a good decision. I think it was the great decision. It was probably the best decision for me at the time. I think I think it depends on every single person. I don't think it could do any harm, to be honest. But I also think everyone is different, and
Mhm.
if you also really kind of value a high school experience, and if you want to stick around and be with your peers, then by all means, that's also great. Especially if you have the grades to back it, and if you're planning on going to a 4 years straight out of high school, then I think that's fantastic, and to stay put. But I think if you are having trouble with kind of even figuring out what it is that you want to do, if you are having financial issues and you know that you don't or you're not going to be able to afford a 4 year directly out of high school, if you don't have the grades to back it or to get scholarships, then I'd say taking that exit exam, getting out of high school as early as possible, focusing on getting your grades together at a CC. I think that would benefit somebody, in the long run. And I know it benefited me. I ended up graduating college at the age of 21. So I turned 21, and 3 months later, I had a degree. I was younger than every single person in my class. I was the first of my group of friends to get a degree. I was the youngest of my group of friends to get a degree. And I think that just benefited me in the long run. Even to this day, if I'm not even mistaken, I think I'm the youngest person that works at my company. And so that benefited me a lot. I think it gave me a lot of experience. it allowed me to mature at a younger age. So I
Mhm.
think it does vary, and I think everybody will have a different opinion on it. But I don't think that it could do any harm. The only advice I'd give people is to do your research on the test, and if you do decide to take the test, you do have to pay for it. It's not super expensive, but obviously, you don't want to waste your money. So study for the test, make sure you do well. And if anybody has taken the KC exams that a lot of public high schools make you take, I think in about 10th grade, it's pretty similar to that exam.
Okay, that's good to know. Um, so you mentioned currently you think you might be the youngest at your company now. Are we
Yeah,
same age? Are we both 25? Well, I'm
I'm
25.
24.
Are you 20? Oh, so you're just yeah, you're younger than me then. So at any point, I'm curious, did you ever have people in the company looking at you like this guy's like too young? Or like if you were like let's say in a meeting setting, for example, there's something going on and you were talking, was there anyone kind of like what exactly does he have to offer that he's speaking out? Or has it been pretty smooth sailing for the most part?
Yeah, you know what? I That's a great question, and I think anybody that's early on in their career kind of has those moments where you feel
Mm,
like oh, like I'm in the room with a bunch of adults, and maybe I shouldn't speak up, or like maybe my idea is stupid. I think you will probably come across that at some point in your life, at some point in your career. I think for me, I've always been pretty lucky. I think that I've worked with a good enough group of people at all the jobs that I've held, where my opinion does matter. I think if I'm being fully honest, though, I'm no different from anybody else. I think there's definitely been times where I'm sitting with C-level executives in a room, or with the founders of a company that I work at, and sometimes you shy away from sharing your
mm,
opinion, or sometimes you shy away from giving harsh critical feedback that people actually need to hear, because it'll benefit them, it'll benefit the company. So I've learned, especially being in a people ops function, that it's always better to chime in and to let your voice be heard. And over the years, I've grown a lot in that regard, and I'm a lot more comfortable speaking to people significantly more experienced than I am, or senior to me. But yeah, I think in my personal experience, I've always been fairly fortunate that people actually do care to hear me out, and if I have something to say, that it's at least kind of received and respected in that room.
yeah, I'm in the same boat as you for the most part. I or if there was a moment where someone said like what if someone was thinking why is this guy saying anything, at least they were nice enough to not verbalize it.
Right, right,
But
yeah. You gotta
I've even
respect
had
everybody.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I'll be honest, I've been in the boat where like I'll see something a peer says and I'm like, "Well, what do you know, dude? Like
Yeah,
you're the same age as me. Why are you like preaching?" But at the same time now I'm in that same boat where like I've started this whole thing. I'm not necessarily saying I have a lot of things to offer. That's why I'm not doing it solo. That's why I have guests each time I do this cuz I know maybe there are things together we know, but then there's also things that you know that I don't know, experiences you've had that I don't know.
right,
So once I started thinking of it like that more, because I'm thinking of one specific person that I would see on LinkedIn that this guy was possibly even younger than me, but he would put like really good quality posts and he would put videos along with it. And the things he was saying weren't bad, like they were things to encourage people and it was recommendations. But I remember at that time I'd see it every time and I'd be like, dude, you're younger than me. Like, what
right,
exactly are you offering? But it's just that like at least what I think it's like just listen and see first. Like you can as if you're older, it might sound eh, maybe redundant, but I think it's just because like it's like you already know. But I think what I wasn't factoring in was maybe I know, but there's a bunch of people on this platform that might hear one thing he says out of like a 10-minute video where it's like I didn't know that. And that's
right.
actually what I needed right at this moment to kind of put me over the hump.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
agreed. I think there's always something you can potentially learn. Obviously, any field, any professional, anybody who has an opinion, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be something that they came up with on their own. I think people are constantly sharing knowledge. I mean, I learn a lot from the people that I work with daily. I learn a lot from my boss, from a lot of the C-level executives that I work with. And so if I were to learn a piece of information and pass that along, it chances are it'll do more good than bad, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's always a wealth of knowledge out there to learn from a wide variety of people.
That's a good point. So w- so me as well, but you had an internship that was during college or was that after you had graduated?
It was during my last semester of college.
Was yours mandatory? Like, did Loyola mandate that you have to have X amount of hours of internship before you graduate, or was it if you do it, you do it. If you don't, you don't?
Right. So it wasn't mandated. There was one, I think there was like one kind of sorry, not child development, like a career development type of course that did, it had some type of like an internship requirement, or you'd get school credit for the internship. So that wasn't my specific case.
Hmm.
I just ended up doing the internship because, I was hoping that it would help me land a job out of college, which it did. And I'm not sure if you want to get to that point. We can talk about that, but that's the main reason why I took the internship.
Yeah, I've because I asked that because there are different people in like what like school what like college does the communications major fall under? Like
So
what's it
we
called?
had it was actually the College of Communication and Fine Arts, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. So like your bachelor's, what is it, a BA?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because mine, so I did finance, so it's College of Business. But what I've noticed is the people that I've talked to in different schools, because my school mandated an internship. I think we had to do
Yeah.
400 hours or something, which pretty much breaks down to like a full time of working in like a summer period.
Right.
But there's a lot of people I talk to, and it's I guess it varies by major where they don't have it mandated. And honestly, I think that's the first for me. That seems like the first mistake because because one, if you do an internship, the one good thing is, well, there's a couple good things in my opinion. It's that you get the experience of working in a professional setting for starters if you haven't really had that to that point, which is important because you just kind of gauge how do I need to behave in a setting like this? What kind of people do I deal with? People that are pleasant to be around, people that are sucky to be around.
For sure.
But then at the same time, you'll see it's like, what I'm studying, is this even, do I like this? Like maybe I picked finance, but like once I'm in a financial setting, it's like, man, I actually hate this. So it's been bizarre to me that that's not a mandatory thing. So for you, it wasn't mandatory, but you did it. So was it because it's like, well, let me see if I actually like the thing I'm studying?
Yeah, and it's even more funny, I think, for my specific situation because I was studying communication and media, which is not directly transferable to human resources. So
Hmm.
I actually wasn't learning a lot about what those behind the scenes HR conversations look like at a company. I wasn't learning about recruiting and staffing. I wasn't learning about an organization's budgets and headcount planning. So that's not anything that I had known in my educational career. But yeah, I mean, I took the internship because I wanted to get a sense of the role and what that would entail, and I wanted to. I think even just kind of strengthen my skill set within that field specifically. I think I was kind of coming to a point after a couple of HR mixers and after speaking to some HR professionals. I was like, okay, well, maybe I should try this out. Maybe I should try the internship and see how that goes. And then again, also being a 2020 like a 20 no 20 21 almost 21-year-old college student about to graduate, I was freaking out about a
Mm.
career, and I was freaking out about like my first gig, and I'm gonna have student loans and how am I gonna make money. And so I was I think more so than even learning about the field, I think I was hoping that the internship would help me land my first job, or that internship would turn into a full-time
Mhm.
job out of college. So that was probably the main motivator for me. But yeah, I mean, also to learn more about the HR field, or to learn, really anything about the HR field, because my what I was studying in school was not necessarily teaching me or preparing me to become an HR professional.
Yeah, honestly, I think that's the case for a lot of majors. Like even I look back at I'll think about my time at school and the classes I took. It's a good thing I took them because they're like having the knowledge is important, but very little, if any of it, has directly translated to anything I've done so far post graduating. And
Right.
I'm in finance. I studied finance and I've only worked in finance and it still hasn't directly translated, which is kind of interesting. But I still obviously go to school if you're going to do something along those lines. Okay, so I was mentioning, I think it was off camera. In the beginning, I never really understood what HR people do exactly. What is their thing? And then you were touching on how when we were talking about the namesake of it, you were mentioning, I think, kind of in line to what my thought was, like, let's try and get rid of that stigma. So let's kind of rebrand essentially, which honestly, I think now that you talked me through it, it makes more sense to me as to why you guys did it. So, what are some of the things that you do day to day?
Yeah. So I think to kind of answer that, I would say I want to give you just like a quick run through of what an overall HR
Yeah, please
organization
do.
might, or chances are they're kind of overseeing at a company,
Hmm.
but anything from employee relations to compliance to audits to payroll to benefits, to recruiting and staffing, employee engagement, company culture, retention strategy. I'm not sure if I said recruiting and staffing, but that's obviously more of an obvious one. But it is kind of a wide variety of things. And what I do now on a day to day, so I'm coming up on 2 years at the company that I work at now, and in all honesty, my role has kind of changed a lot from when I started. I joined the HR team back in 2018, and I was a recruiting slash people operations coordinator. So I was really just assisting with anything that I could within the HR function. And what that primarily meant was onboarding and offboarding, whether it was freelance employees or full time staff employees. Helping with recruiting, helping with scheduling. I started picking up my own, positions to recruit for, and then even just like miscellaneous things, right? When we'd organize events or like the holiday parties, I do a lot of coordinating and just assisting on those projects. The company kind of changed and the teams changed and shifted, so then I ended up taking full ownership of all things talent and bringing talent in. So I owned that function for almost a year, I want to say. And the team again kind of changed, the company changed, the company grew, and right now, especially right now, just given that it's a very unique time with the pandemic that we're all facing, but right now what I focus on is all things talent, bringing talent in, whether it be freelance or staff, full-time staff. I work with a lot of cross-functional departments and teams now to try to pinpoint any pain points or any inefficiencies in our process, and try to come up with new processes that the company can follow, and hopefully that makes everyone's jobs a little bit easier. And then I also oversee all things company culture and kind of retention. So I check in with employees, kind of gauge whether or not there are any pain points for them. Learning and development opportunities as well. So like try to understand what it is that they're doing, what they like about their job, what they don't like about their job, if there's anything that they want to learn or other areas of the company that they want to learn about, and try to facilitate those opportunities and create those opportunities for them. So it's kind of a hybrid right now, as far as my day to day.
Yeah, okay. So HR does do stuff. That's what that confirms for
Yes.
me. HR
In
does do
short, yes. Yeah.
stuff. One of the things you mentioned you do, like kind of the focus on company culture stuff. I kind of know the answer to it, but I want to hear your side of it. There's stuff where things you were mentioning that you as an organization, the HR people will set up for the employees, maybe as like
Yeah.
a morale booster, whatever the reasoning for it may be. I'll be honest, there's times where me and like the group I'm working in, just in general, every place I've worked, when that instance comes up, sometimes it's an eye roll. It's like, oh, we got to go to this. Now we got to do this
Yeah.
HR function. Sometimes, depending what it is, like, all right, cool. But regardless of what it is, from the HR perspective of it, why is it critical to have those types of things in a business setting?
Yeah. I mean, I think multiple reasons. I think you can never please everybody, and I think there are always going to be some employees at a company that are a lot more engaged and a
Hmm.
lot more involved in extracurricular
Right.
activities, if you will. So I think you know in that respect, you would have to you can't not provide any type of extracurricular activity,
Right.
right? There always has to be a sense of like a camaraderie, a sense of a team, right? And belonging to something bigger than just your day to day and your role. So we try to facilitate that with allowing people to let go of their work for a minute, whether it be like a happy hour, like get to
Hmm.
chill and engage with your colleagues and talk about the struggles of your day, or even get to learn about somebody else's job and what it is that they do. So I think that matters to us because not only does it keep employees hopefully happy, but it kind of stimulates a more positive culture where you're instilling in people like, hey, work is important, but work is not absolutely everything, and we're not doing brain surgery. We're not curing cancer at the end of the day. Like nobody will drop dead right now if you take a 20-minute break
Mhm.
to do this silly activity with your colleagues, or to make a smoothie outside with your colleagues, or to do a happy hour at like 4 p.m. on a Friday. So we just try to instill that in people, so it's not all work and no play, but we try to find a happy medium and a happy balance.
Yeah, after a certain period of time, that's what I started to realize. Like that's the thing. 'Cause sometimes I'd be like, man, we got to do this. Like I got stuff to do, and it's obviously it's not mandatory to go, but that's as kind of as I started stopped being a sourpuss about it. I was like, you know what? It makes sense why they're doing this. Because imagine if, like you were saying, if there was nothing at all,
Right.
I don't know how great the retention is going to be at that place if you guys just go work and leave only. It makes it difficult too, because then you're not really looking for, and especially if you know ahead of time, like Friday, it's going to be a happy hour. You have something to kind of look forward to during the week. Let's say you have a crappy week in terms of a lot of stuff to do, meetings. At least you know it's like, well, at least end of the week we're going to do that as a group.
Completely, and I think for us in like a people ops, or like if you're in people ops, or if you're in an HR function at a company, we kind of view the overall organization as a wheel, or like a snowball, right? So everything in some way intertwines with one another or correlates with one another. So if employees aren't happy, and if they're bored, and if they're overworked, then you're going to start worrying about retention strategy and retention numbers, and what your
Hmm.
turnover rates look like. And then what that does is A, costs the company a lot of money to replace people, and B, puts a lot of strain on a recruiting team, or a recruiter, or whatever that size is, right? Whatever that function looks like.
Hmm.
But it puts a lot of stress on those individuals, who are then having to backfill, depending on how large a company is, but like 5, 6, 10, 15 positions at any given time, which is obviously very, very challenging. And I think, it's no one will ever fully understand how time consuming and expensive a recruiting process is, unless they're
Hmm.
actually, if they're in it.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And so I think, again, it's one big kind of snowball, right? So if employees are happy, and if you give them the opportunity to put their feet up and like kick back every once in a while and have fun and laugh with their colleagues, then you're more likely to build not only stronger relationships with the team, but you're going to probably build a more positive company culture, and people are likely to stay there longer.
Do you feel like this is that mindset is like a regional thing? For example, by regional I mean like for example, we're in SoCal, right?
Right.
Lot of these like hip companies are doing more things that you guys are doing. You hear that about stuff in like the Pacific Northwest, like the Portland area, Seattle area, New York, Boston. You don't, at least for me, and I try and read about stuff like this, don't really hear about it within like the coast. It's like if you're along a coastline, let's do the fun stuff. If you're within the coastlines, it's maybe the more traditional. Not to say they don't do anything at all, but
Right.
it seems like it's a little more. Yeah, I guess the word just being traditional in that. Have you? I don't know if you've noticed that on your end. Where I think definitely here in California, it's like that. Where it's I feel like
Yeah.
people know that that's the thing that we have a lot of companies have out here is open
Yeah.
bar
No.
or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I agree. I think it definitely depends. I think region has a lot to do with it. I think, even the type of company, and I
Mm,
think also the how old the company is. And I hate
mm.
to use that word, like old, young, and we always
I
try to
think
stay
that's a
away
good
from
point though.
that. But with a lot of new tech companies, a lot of startups, I think it all even just stems from, I talked about, traditional HR teams and kind of how they've progressed and how they've modernized. I think, we used to be very process centric, and I think now it's a lot more, our work models are based a lot more heavily on results now. And I think I even think of like working from home, right?
Mm,
Some companies allow fully remote work. Some companies are flexible, like, hey, I can text my boss and be like, hey, I'm not feeling too well today. Like, I'll just work from home.
mhm,
And so I think as long as results are being met, companies are a lot more likely to be flexible with their employees. So I think a lot of that has to do though with region, with the type of company that you're working at, how old the company is, and how modern and forward and progressive they are
mhm.
as an organization. So, I mean, yeah, I definitely think that it can be regional. I think a lot of companies are doing their best to get caught up, especially companies that are a lot more, traditional with their
Mhm.
thought process and the way they think. I mean, the company I worked at prior to the one that I work at now was very traditional.
Mhm.
If comparing and contrasting to where I work now. Even as far as like dress code and strict start and stop times. Whereas the company I work at now, we're a lot more flexible, again,
Hmm.
assuming that results are being met. So if your work is being done and it's being done well, people are typically not breathing down your neck about what you're wearing to work that day, or if you started at 9 a.m. on the dot, or if you get to work from home, or if you get to go to a happy hour. It tends to be a lot more flexible. And I think the newer wave of companies are following that model. We're a lot more
Yeah.
focused on the results and what that looks like versus, hey, did you start at 9 a.m. and did you clock out exactly
Hmm.
at 6 p.m.?
Yeah. I think because like when you mention like the newer companies, I think it's also part of it is a generational thing. And I'm not saying one is right, one is wrong. It's more of an interesting thing to me how that shift has started to happen more so in the last maybe decade-ish, if even then.
Yeah.
So, but I don't think it's a bad thing. I mean, I think people like more along our age are more are more always trying to find like for example like working from home. That's a not it's especially now with this stuff going on. It's kind of being almost like you have to do it. It's like whether as a company you are for or against it, you have to do it. So I'm kind of curious to see what's going to be the result of that because I've talked about it with friends. Like, are we going to see, and I read stuff too, like, are we finally going to see companies that maybe were on the fence or companies that had it to an extent allowing work from home? Are they finally going to fully go over to like, yeah, you guys can work from home entirely or maybe twice a week, 3 times a week? Or are there going to be companies that are still like, well, we did that for 2 months, not doing that again. Come to work. It's interesting. I'm curious because I've read articles and stuff about it too. I've seen stuff like, I think it was Twitter that was saying like you can work from home like forever, except certain functions they might have you come in. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm curious to see what the effects will be, but I guess we'll
Yeah.
have to wait for a time and see.
I definitely think it'll impact the way companies view employees and what it means to work at an organization. I think even for us, we talk a lot about, if and when we do have to go back to the office, who do we prioritize, right?
Hmm.
There are people at our company that do that. Their work requires them to be connected to the server. I'm not one of those people, so I think if we did need to start slowly going back to the office, we'd prioritize employees that need to be on the server and
Hmm.
prioritize their safety. So if that means having just a certain group or a certain department go back to the office and making sure that they can be, distant from one another, there's enough, cleanliness measures being taken and no other colleagues around, so that they can get their job done most efficiently. That's kind of how we would approach that. But I definitely think that this pandemic will affect the way people just view employees and whether or not they need to be in the office. And I also think another factor is cost. The cost of having an office space,
Hmm.
right? So if
Yeah, definitely.
your employees are being efficient and if they're getting their work done and results are being met and they're home, if you can save hundreds and thousands of dollars on rent, on real estate, finances,
Right.
I think it could be very beneficial to a lot of companies. I read earlier today that Amazon actually, their one of their buildings, I forgot in which state, is going solely to it's going to be a homeless shelter. They're kind of
Oh wow,
converting it
that's awesome.
to a homeless shelter. So shout out to Amazon. Obviously,
Yeah.
Amazon is a beast. But again, it just kind of goes to show, I think, how we'll start to see a shift in people starting to be a lot more flexible, or employers starting to be a lot more flexible with employees working from home.
Yeah, I think we will. It's just a matter of how much time it takes for that to happen.
For sure.
I'm gonna last thing I'm gonna ask you about is so when it comes to interviewing,
Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen fantastic interviews, and I'm sure you've seen stuff where you're like, "Can someone please take me out of the room?" Quick, because I know I have you limited time. Quick example of each, like one example where someone like blew you away. What was it about the person, the way maybe the way they were answering, and the one that just was awful? Was it because they seemed nervous, or was it like they were just ill prepared?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I deal with this all the time, and I even coach other hiring managers or interview panel members about what makes an interview successful, right?
Mhm.
And I think HR's role in that is to always keep things as fair as possible, and try to alleviate any type of bias, because we all have unconscious bias. So we try to keep things as fair and consistent across the board as possible. But I
Mhm.
think, it's usually a combination of things, but for me personally, I think what makes an interview successful is obviously preparation. And I think that doesn't mean you have to know every single fact about a company, or you need to know
Mhm.
every single fact about your interviewer. It's not necessarily about overkill. It's just about having the right amount of knowledge, and I think being just intellectually curious.
Mhm.
I think a lot of people are more inclined to hire people that are in some way, shape, or form inspired or motivated by the company. So I think just having some understanding of what the company does, having questions prepared about the company, where it's going, how your role can play a part in that. Even making suggestions, honestly, I think is great and strong in an interview. It shows people that you're forward thinking and you already have
Mhm.
ideas. But for me, when it comes to actual interview questions, we try to instill. There are three main types of interview questions that we try to get folks on a panel to ask, and those are
Mhm.
behavioral questions, situational questions, and verification questions. So, verification is usually kind of reserved for earlier stages in the process. So, say like I was interviewing you for a finance role, I'd be like, "Hey, have you worked with XYZ accounting tool, right?
Got it. Mhm.
Or what accounting tool have you worked with, or accounting tools have you worked with in the past?" So that's just to verify whether or not you've worked with XYZ softwares. Or I'd say,
Mhm.
"Hey, Menwa, have you done, I'm not a finance person, but like, have you done
Whatever.
pivot tables in Excel
Mhm.
before?
Right.
Or like, what's this formula in Excel? Like, what does this do?"
Mhm.
And I'd just kind of verify your understanding or your skill set. And that's usually reserved for hard skills, right? So if we have like a
Right.
non-negotiable absolute requirement that this person needs to know X to do this job or to get hired. Um, but if we move over to behavioral or situational questions, so behavioral questions are the ones that people usually hate, and people have
Yeah.
a lot of trouble when they're interviewing. But those are the "tell me about a time" type
Mhm.
questions,
Mhm.
and usually what we are hoping to hear. So like, say I'm asking you, "Tell me about a time you had to deliver really difficult feedback to your boss or
Right.
to your direct report," or "Tell me about a time you dropped the ball on a deadline and you absolutely like screwed something up," right?
Mhm.
And so what we would hope to hear from that is, okay, so what is the problem? What's the situation? Identify it. Identify your fault,
Mhm.
and then describe to me the steps you took to come to a resolution.
Right.
All right. We don't want to hear people kind of dancing around the subject. The biggest flag to me is if someone can't own up to the fact that they're human and they also make mistakes. So if
Mhm.
you're constantly pointing fingers, that's a huge flag for us. This
Right.
isn't necessarily aligned with our company culture and our
Mhm.
values, which is a huge thing that we also consider when we're making a hire. So someone may be technically more suitable for the job, but if you come into the interview and you talk a bunch of shit about your previous employer, you can never own up to your own mistakes. If it's always
Mhm.
your colleague's fault, that's probably, it's a little bit of a flag and it can be problematic.
Right.
So that's behavioral. And then situational questions, those are usually like hypothetical situations. So I'd be like, "Hey, say you are doing expenses for C-level executives, you're behind on your deadline, and they keep delaying their expenses, like they're not giving you their expenses. Like, what are you going to do?"
Mm.
And so that's, we try to make that as unique, and specific to each department, and we encourage hiring managers or people that are on the interview panel to make that as unique and specific to their department as possible, and always just probe for more. And that's just to kind of put someone on the spot, right? So if someone's going to put you on the spot, you're going to have to kind of think about that situation right then and there and give them your best solution right there on the fly. And that's just kind of tests how quick-witted somebody is, how they can kind of come up with a solution on the fly, about whatever that situation may be. But for me, I think, being conversational, culture is a huge thing. So if someone comes in, if they're friendly, if they're conversational, if they can own up to the previous mistakes that they've made, if they can tell you how they've made adjustments in their processes to improve their own work ethic in the past, that's always going to be a successful interview. If someone comes in and they're unable to kind of answer questions, if they never admit to ever making a mistake in
Mhm.
their lives, or if they're constantly blaming their previous employer, their boss, their colleague, their dog for whatever reason
Mhm.
why something kind of went up in flames, a little bit of a red flag. So I'm not sure if that was a perfect example.
No, that is, yeah. I
Okay,
appreciate
cool,
that.
cool.
All right, I'm gonna take one last one because you snuck in three extra. I got three extra. I got three
Yeah,
more
no
minutes with
worries.
you. So I'll make this the last one then. So in terms of like when a bad interview, and when I say bad, I don't just mean kind of what you were part of what you were describing in terms of people just aren't accountable in their responses.
Mhm.
When it comes to a bad interview where it's that plus you can maybe as the interviewer you can tell this person just seems uneasy and nervous.
Yeah.
how how do you guys as the recruiting panel when you get that feeling, how do you guys kind of try and ease them? Do you directly tell them, hey, no worries, take your time? Or do you guys try and maybe throw like a softball question to try and get them to ease down? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people that have that issue where it's not even that they have the knowledge, they're good people, they're good to work with, but just for whatever reason, that situation, they just clam up and they get panicky.
Yeah. That's a great question, and I think a lot of that even goes back to the whole bias thing, right? So that's why we
Mm,
try to make we try to structure questions in a way where we're not going to dock somebody for being a little bit nervous or for being
mm-hmm,
a little bit quirky. It's more about the substance and what they're actually saying versus maybe their delivery. If you are unable to, if you're so nervous that you're unable to speak a sentence, that may be a little bit problematic because then an employer might worry about how you'd collaborate and communicate with
mm,
your colleagues or with
that's a
other
good point.
departments or whatever. But usually we try to keep things, like I said, as fair and consistent as possible. So we tie all of the responses back to our company culture and our values, right? So I have set up in our own applicant tracking system a scorecard method that again ties back to those four main values. And every company has different values, but I think even with those behavioral questions or situational questions, if I'm giving you a hypothetical scenario, just your response alone, again, whether or not you're nervous, can in a sense again can be directly kind of compared to our values,
Mm-hmm.
right? So even if you're a little bit nervous but you are taking ownership of your mistake in the past, that will definitely supersede whether or not you were a little bit nervous and if
Got it.
you're jittery or whatnot. But as far as prepping interviewees, you know I think it's always hard to prep someone, during an interview. Partially because I'm not always in the room during an interview, and so I
Mm,
can't ever control what is being said in an interview or what the
right.
panel members will say or whether or not they are just they've got good enough people skills to make someone feel
Mm-hmm.
comfortable, kind of ease them a little bit. I think some people are just naturally a little bit better at doing that than
Right.
others. Whereas some people I know that I even work with are super super direct, and that may even make someone a little bit more nervous. But that's
Right.
just, hey, I'm here for a reason. Like, I want to interview you. I'm not necessarily here to be your friend. Like, I just have
Mm-hmm.
questions. I want to know what you got, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's tough to say. I think for me, I mean, with candidates that I've worked with in the past, I think it's always fair to give people a heads up about who they're meeting, and if there are any specific pointers that you can give somebody, that's always fair. Again, you never want to favor one candidate over the other. So if I give any tips to one candidate, chances are I'm going to give that tip to all candidates. And again, may the strongest candidate win. And that's just kind of how we typically go about things. But there are a lot of different things to kind of weigh. And I think again we've made decisions in the past where someone may have been more technically qualified for the role, but a lot of the times values and company culture does play a significant role in making a decision as well. So it's a tough one. I think the best thing that you could tell people to do to prep for an interview is to know who they're talking to. Just have
Mm-hmm.
some basic background,
Right.
and then know the company. I've had people send me an email or send me a cover letter with the incorrect company name on there, and although that's not
That's awful.
it's not the biggest mistake because you may be sending out a bunch of applications everywhere, but my rule of thumb is if you're going to go the extra mile, then really go the extra
Yeah.
mile. Do your due diligence to make
Mm-hmm.
sure that all the little details are correct. You dotted your I's and crossed your T's. But with interviewing, I think I always encourage panel members to just try to be as fair and consistent as possible. And if someone's nervous, we're not going to really take that into consideration unless it's clear that it would directly impact the way they work.
Right.
So
All right, thanks, dude. I appreciate
yeah,
that. I know we've been talking. So first of all, thanks for being able to do this. We've been talking about this for like a couple months at this point, and
yeah,
it's something on my end just kept pushing it back, pushing it back. We're finally able to do it. I'm glad we did because I learned a bunch from it too. I got other questions. I'm gonna save them because I know we wanted to do a in person at the actual studio. So once all of this stuff settles down, we'll do another one,
yeah,
because I still got more stuff I wanna ask, and, you can see the place out too, and
for sure.
I think it'll be cool because I have some interesting questions that
Cool. No, for
I think
sure. Hey, it was super fun, and thank you for having me. I'm excited to see where everything goes, and
yeah,
yeah, by
me
all
too.
means, I'd love to get in the studio and we can chat some more.
Perfect, man. Thanks a lot, Eric. Have a good day, dude.
All right, you too, Manuel. Bye. Peace
Bye.
out.